Learnings from Dharmasastra to improve the process of present litigation. We have the pleasure of welcoming Sri Krishnan Venkatraman on stage. Sir. Sri Krishnan Venkatraman is an advocate and researcher in Dharmasastra and has a keen interest in Sanskrit literature. He is a student of Sastra under the late Dr. Piyushkant Dikshit of the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Sanskrit University. He is a trustee of Satvidya Paripalana Trust, Chennai. He has a previous academic background in engineering with a BTech from IIT Bombay and an MS from Harvard University. He has completed his LLB from the University of Delhi. We welcome Sri Krishnan Venkatraman.
Namaha Sarvebhyaha. It's an honor to be able to place before you some of our experiences while reading the Dharmasastra, especially our concurrent experiences as I'm a practitioner of law. And I would like to state here that this process of exploring the Dharmasastra and our learnings that we are here able to share with you today has been an outcome of a process which involved multiple participants. So we have also been leveraging technology by way of interacting with a group of interested persons across the country. So we have a judge from Bihar, from Darbhanga. So he has participated in our daily sessions. We have a Sanskrit scholar, Tarkashastram, Dr. Naveen, who is from Chennai and Kanchipuram. He has been participating. And we have one of our members, Mr. Mukundan. He is an advocate. He is also part of our Vitakshara study group. So the idea today is to be sharing with you some of our interesting learnings that we have gathered as part of reading the Dharmasastra. And to this end, I can mention here, because today there was talk about the digital campus of the Sanskrit College and a number of facilitations that are provided by the Sanskrit College. And one of the offshoots from the tree that I saw growing out was introduction to Tarkashastram, introduction to Shastram as such. And I can sort of confirm that reading the Shastram, accessing the Tarkashastram provides clear access to various other Shastrams, in this case, Dharmasastram. So therefore, Tarkashastram as a stepping stone to accessing the Shastram is something that I can vouch for, because I had benefited from the tutelage of my guru, late Professor Piyushkant Dikshit from the Lal Bahadur Shastri Sanskrit Vidyapith. And I have definitely gained advantage from that. So the idea today is to provide you with some insights into what we have learned while going through the Dharmasastram, trying to get an understanding of what Dharma or Dharmasastram could be, and the kind of traditions that had been existing till quite recently. So till the British, when the British colonial enterprise started in the late 1700s, there had been an ongoing process of Nibandha Karanam. So therefore, from time to time, the propounders of Dharmasastra, the practitioners of Dharmasastram would update and discuss with regard to the current, the current social circumstances, what could be the understanding of the Dharmasastram, and provide various opinions and discussions. And this process was ongoing till quite recently. Unfortunately, that process has sort of, we find a gap in the tradition that has crept in. And we believe that there is a sufficient space both for students of law, students of Sanskritam to come together, especially in a forum like the digital campus of the Madras Sanskrit College, to bring impetus and rejuvenate that tradition which was part of our culture, which had continued for millennia, and which provided us with a guiding light to how we can govern ourselves. So therefore, any talk of decolonization or swatantriyam from within, we believe that understanding the Dharmasastram and governing ourselves with a perspective that comes from within is something that we have to look into. So from this perspective, so Dharmasastram, if you look into whether there is a particular text, because that is something that engaged the British when they came into India. They wanted to know whether there is one particular code, a constitution, a particular text that can be identified for the purpose of exerting their control over the population. So they started with say Calcutta or the Bengal areas, maybe Madras to a certain extent, Bombay, wherever the coastal regions where they started exerting their influence from, the attempt was to try to see whether there is a single text which they can adopt, maybe translate and use as a code, because they in Europe were used to codal frameworks. So they wanted to have laws, statutes as such. But whereas if you look at the Dharmasastra, it is more like a forest. There are multiple documents, multiple sources of Dharma. And even in the Nibandhas, when you read the Nibandhas in their original, you find that there are references from various texts, not only from the Dharmasastram. Dharmasastram is primarily the Smriti Parampara. So you'll have various multiple Smritikaras, like the Manusmriti or the Yajnavalkya Smriti, Narada, Gautama, etc. So the various Smritikaras will have their input into how they see a particular situation. You also have the Smriti, which is based on the Shruti. So therefore, there are also references to the Vedic texts itself. There are references to the Puranas. There are references to what are there in the Itihasas, like the Ramayanam and the Mahabharatam. There are references to interpretation rules which stem from Mimamsa, Vyakaranam. So therefore, the Dharmashastram itself draws upon understandings from various other shastrams. So the preservation and pursuit of Dharma, but what separates the study of Dharma or Dharmashastram, we find is that the purpose is to focus on the preservation of Dharma. So therefore, out of the four Purusharthas of Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha, while the Artha Shastra might focus on valuing Artha or bringing Artha as the focus of the outcome of a particular process, here the outcome, the focus is on ensuring that the Dharma is established, and if there is any conflict between Dharma and Artha, it is Dharma that will prevail. So from that perspective, we find that there is a separate stream of study in the Dharma Shastram, primarily arising from the Smritis. So this is to... So one interesting, based on our readings of the Dharma Shastram, one interesting definition of Dharma that we came across in the Mahabharatam, in the Shanti Parva, this is the 259th Adhyaya in Shloka 20, is Yadanyair Vihitam Neched Atmanah Karma Purushaha Natat Pareshu Kurvita Janan Apriyam Atmanaha. So which is similar to what we understand as do unto others what you expect others to do unto you. That is one encapsulated understanding of what Dharma can mean. And this is after multiple discussions, rounds of discussions between Bhishma and Yudhishthira about different aspects of Dharma, what could be, is it karma, is it jnanam, etc. And this is one crystallized precipitation of the understanding of Dharma that we see in the Shanti Parva, which is inspiring from the view of understanding what is Dharma. So if you look at what is the living traditions of Dharma Shastram, the living traditions of Dharma Shastram, we see that primarily we find that wherever there was political patronage, say the Krishna Devaraya or the traditions in the south starting Krishna Devaraya or the Maratha Empire, so wherever there had been political patronage, wherever there had been a sense of putting it into practice, the understanding of Dharma Shastram for the purpose of governance, because Raja Dharma is an integral part of Dharma Shastram. And from the point of view of practice of law, we are interested in what is Vyavahara Dharma, because Vyavahara is the dispute resolution. And how we resolve disputes plays a driving force into how we organize ourselves. So if you have a law, for example, in our country, so it could be simple family laws like the Hindu Marriage Act or the Hindu Succession Act. So once that law comes into place, we end up organizing our lives around the law and the interpretations of the law by the courts. So similarly, the Vyavahara, how the laws were interpreted, how Dharma was interpreted, how the Dharma had to be given effect to in the courts, which had the power to implement Dharma, that had given rise to the sense of Dharma within the population, because that was the key driving force. So that we find it was flourishing as and when there were instances of political patronage to Dharma. So we had our own independent sense of organizing ourselves into political situations. That is when the Dharma Shastram was most effective. But today when we see that there are, out of the forest of Dharma Shastram that is available before us, there are questions as to whether we should adopt the entire Dharmasastram today, or whether we should have our political sensibilities have changed today. There, I believe even the Honorable Principal today, when he mentioned that Sarvam Puratanam na Niravadyam, Sarvam Yad Arvachinam na Avadyam. That is, you cannot say that everything that is old is to be taken or translated into as a perfect instance of what we should take, and not that everything new should be discarded. So there we find another interesting shloka in the discussions of the Shanti Parva, which says, Ardhanashe samutpanne hyardham tyajati panditaha. And Ardhanashe samutpanne sarvam tyajati durmatihi. That is, if we are prejudiced against our own traditions, the first idea is to have a sense of shraddha towards the traditions. And then after that, looking into the Dharmasastram, looking into the set of rules and principles as to how a society can govern itself, if we feel that something does not appeal to our sensibilities today, and if there can be a change or some portions can be left out, the Pandit or the person with Shraddha would seek to only remove those portions which do not appeal to the present context and continue with the other portions of the tradition. That would be the Ardhanashe samutpanne hyardham tyajati panditaha. But one who is prejudiced and doesn't have a sense of shraddha towards the traditions would, with a prejudiced mind, want to seek to tyajati, give up the entire tradition, which is something that we ought not to entertain. So the idea is continue with a sense of shraddha, continue with a sense of understanding and towards our traditions, and accept what makes sense. And so therefore, the point being that study of the Dharmasastram makes sense even today for the purpose of educating ourselves as to how we can organize ourselves more efficiently. So some important sources of Dharmasastram that we have seen during the course of our study are Yajnavalkya Smriti, which always stands out in the study of Dharmasastram. So this is just to get a sense of how we ended up focusing our study on the Yajnavalkya Smriti, on the Mitakshara Nibandha. So there has been a Nibandha Parampara where scholars had been applying their mind to the understanding and interpretation of various aspects of Dharma. And in that, the Mitakshara stands out as something that has found acceptance throughout the land of India, except for some portions in Bengal and Assam where there had been a slight change with regard to certain aspects, like whether widows should get the property of undivided family, or whether the property gets transferred on the death of a person or on the birth of a child. So there had been some small changes with regard to the understanding, difference of understanding between Mitakshara and Dayabhaga. But primarily we find that the Yajnavalkya Smriti and Mitakshara stand out as an instance of what we can today consider to be applicable law in the country that had been followed by various principalities across the country. Another aspect of literature that we find meaningful is the history of Dharmasastram by Dr. P.V. Kane, who incidentally also received the Bharat Ratna for his efforts through his lifetime. So we find that as a country, we attach that sense of importance to the understanding of the Dharmasastram itself, that a person who had devoted his entire life to the study of Dharmasastram had been awarded with the Bharat Ratna. Then there's also the legal and constitutional history of India by Justice Rama Joyce, who in the recent times has worked to bring out the understanding of the Dharmasastram and its applicability. And some interesting other literature like Appropriation and Invention of Tradition by Nandini Bhattacharya Panda, who as a keen researcher has brought out that till the late 17th century and 18th century, how the practice of Dharmasastram had been prevalent in our community. That is, whenever there is a dispute within a family or between families within a community, the idea would be to go to a Pandit who had a good knowledge of Dharmasastram and seek out an opinion. And that opinion, so the Pandit acts as an arbitrator. What we have today as arbitration, he would act as an arbitrator between the parties, and that arbitration would end with the parties accepting that opinion that had been drafted by the Pandit. And so therefore, it was an active part of our social organization till up to even the late 17th century or 18th century or so. So here, coming back to Yajnavalkya Smriti. So just to understand, that the Yajnavalkya Smriti itself was probably composed around 2100 years ago. So the period I've taken from Dr. P.V. Kane's understanding that he has reflected in his text. So around 2100 years ago, we had a crystallization of what were the laws of India. And that had been practiced throughout India, although Yajnavalkya himself probably composed this in Darbhanga in North Bihar. But that understanding had been widely accepted throughout India, and we find that the Yajnavalkya Smriti was the accepted standard, although there were many other Smritis. The other Smritis would be the effort would be to try to reconcile it with the Yajnavalkya Smriti, which was the primary flow of understanding of Dharma within the land of Bharat. And so there is a good detail on the structure of dispute resolution. Why we chose the Yajnavalkya Smriti is also because it had an expansive understanding of the Vyavahara, in the Vyavahara Adhyaya, of how dispute resolution takes place. And this text, because of its popularity, because of its adoption throughout the country, was cited, quoted, explained by judicial thinkers, and so we have a corpus of material which eventually crystallized in the form of the Mitakshara, where different opinions had been reconciled in around 900 years ago by Vijnaneshwara in Karnataka. So a thought process which started, and also, sir, today you had mentioned that writing, whether we had the history of writing in India. We find that in the Yajnavalkya Smriti and the Manusmriti, so up to 2500, 3000 years ago, that is 1000 BC, there is definite reference to writing. That is, all the judicial records have to be written, the statements have to be written, the replies have to be written, the decisions have to be written. So therefore, definitely there was a strong tradition percolating down to the active units of society, trade, commerce, etc., where writing was definitely prevalent. So there can be no doubt about that, sir. So this Yajnavalkya Smriti is a good starting basis for trying to understand the application of Dharma in India. So we have the invocation of the spirit of Yajnavalkya itself. Vedanta Vedyam Sakalagamagyam Daya Sudha Sindhu Mananta Rupam Shri Yajnavalkyam Paripurna Chandram Shrimad Gurum Nityamaham Namami. So in this salutation to Yajnavalkya, the second part of the first, this is Daya Sudha Sindhu Ananta Rupam. So this aspect is reflected in all aspects, in all parts of Yajnavalkya's writing, where his aspect of compassion, the Yajnavalkya as a perspective of compassion, where he, in his various expositions of how Dharma has to be understood, he clearly brings out the sense of being a Dina Bandhu. That is, the weaker has to be protected so that Matsya Nyaya, that is the bigger fish swallowing the smaller fish, that outcome has to be avoided in society. Society has to be such that the daya towards those who are weaker has to be the driving force of the perspective of Dharma. And that is why this Dharma became prevalent throughout the country, because this was accepted by the people as part of their local behavior, and this was found to be an acceptable exposition for successful organization of society. Pardon? This quote, we ended up traveling to the place, there is a place in Darbhanga, in Madhubani district in Bihar, where Yajnavalkyar's meditating, where he lived and worked. So he might have traveled all throughout the country. We have temples of Yajnavalkya throughout the country, but there is one place that is identified as where he sat and composed various works of his. So there is a temple dedicated to him. In that temple, we found this quote. So, interestingly, because since we are now in the land of Bharat, the second shloka of the Yajnavalkya Smriti is Mithilasthasya Yogindraha Kshanam Dhyatva Bravit Munin Yasmin Deshe Mrugah Krishnaha Tasmin Dharman Nibodhata. So he is now concerned with expounding the Dharma of that place, and he defines the geographical extent to which the Dharma that is detailed in the Yajnavalkya Smriti is applicable. He defines us to be that place where the Krishna, Mrugaha Krishna, which is the black buck, the natural habitat of the black buck is supposed to be the place to which the Yajnavalkya Smriti Dharma is supposed to apply to. And if you look at the map of the world, this is the only area where the black buck is endemic. You don't find the black buck in Southeast Asia, in any other continent. This is the area to which the black buck is endemic. And this is the dharma that is specifically suited for bringing out the best amongst us. So that the public, the population of the land of Bharat, which is encompassed by this area, which is also endemic to the black buck, our purusharthas, the individual's purusharthas in terms of dharma, artha, kama, moksha can be maximized. That method of organization is described in the Yajnavalkya Smriti. That is the understanding that prevails. So in this, we find that the mitakshara, the second aspect, so reading the Yajnavalkya, because it's in a coded, cryptic, pithi form. The Yajnavalkya Smriti, to be understood, we require a nibandha, and the nibandha has been written in the Shastrik parampara, and the applicable, the prevalent nibandha which has found favor across the country is that of the mitakshara. Mitakshara was written around 900 years ago. There is a bhavanam, mitakshara bhavanam, which is dedicated to him. This is in Kalburgi. So something that started in Kalburgi is in Karnataka, North Karnataka. So something that started in Madhubani, in Darbhanga, in Bihar, it spread all across the country. There were multiple interpretations, and the efforts to bring out a meaningful understanding of the differing interpretations happened in Karnataka. So which it brings to us the understanding that the Dharmasastram has applicability, and it had adherents across the country. So different parts of the country have contributed to this understanding. So this is the basic structure. So I just wanted to just share some of our understandings of how there are aspects of the Dharmasastram which we find parallel to in our regular practice of law even today. How we can understand, learn from, and how we can apply some of those aspects of the Dharmasastram to our regular practice also, which is readily applicable, what is readily available. So this is the 4 steps of Vyavahara, which are the Bhasha, plaint, Uttaram, reply, Kriya, which is to lead evidence, and Sadhya Siddhi, which is discovery of truth. So these are the 4 steps that we still follow now. So to a large extent, when we go to court, when we initiate a dispute, these are the 4 aspects of dispute resolution, and these are described in great detail, and the principles thereto are also described in great detail in the Yajnavalkya Smriti, read with the Mitakshara. Similarly, how the judges have to be appointed, or how the members of the Sabha have to be appointed. Shrutadhyayana sampannaha dharmagnya satyavadinaha ragnya sabhasadah karya ripau mitre chaye sama. So this understanding, some aspects which are meaningful to us, is that today there is a dispute as to who should appoint judges. Should judges appoint judges, or should the executive appoint judges? For example, we have a raging debate today in our country. And so there is some clarity, some direction provided there where it makes the ruler responsible for the outcome of every aspect of the country's governance. And so, therefore, there is a discussion and also detailed logic as to why the ruler is the best person who is, the executive has a right to appoint the judges. And so there is to that extent, there is something that we can learn, think about in our day-to-day understanding of how justice administration has to be given effect to. And justice is also open to scrutiny by peer scholars, so that is something that we see even today, and it is useful for understanding. And this is a point, sir, which I wanted to bring to your notice. Pratyarthino agrato lekhyam yatha veditam arthina sama masa tadardhahar nama jatyadi chinhitam. So there is a clear procedure for writing down aspects of disputes, writing down the plaint, writing down the reply. And this is recorded, this is part of the Yajnavalkya Smriti, which is 2100 years ago, definitely, and which is part of a tradition that had extended even beyond that. So therefore, we had a clear tradition of writing down and creating records, written records. This aspect of how the reply has to be. So this is something as a practitioner I find even today, that there are 4 types of replies: sampratipattihi, mithya, pratyavaskandanam, and prangnyaya. These are the 4 types of disputes which replies to a plaint that we find even now, which are applicable. But more interestingly, there is a detailed discussion as to, for each type of reply, who has the burden of proof, who has to lead evidence. If a reply is a direct negation of the statement of the plaintiff, then the person who is negating, he has to lead evidence. So therefore, there is a clear breakup of how the evidence has to be led. So this is something that is directly applicable to us even today. Similarly, one aspect that we find, which we have to learn from today in our practice of law, is that people cannot take the legal system for granted. And what we find, the procedure or the process that had been detailed in the Yajnavalkya Smriti is a provision for perjury leading to significant penalties. So therefore, one cannot take the statements made before a court of law lightly. Any outcome which proves that a wrong statement has been made or a false statement has been made leads to significantly high penalties, which are equal to the amount of the claim itself. So that sort of cuts out the possibility of wrong statements. And the fact that chalam nirasya bhutena vyavaharan nayendrapaha bhutamap yanupanyastam hiyate vyavaharataha. So the primary point that has been brought to the understanding of the practitioners of law is that when you make statements, and this is something that we find applicable today, because when somebody goes to a court of law, the first attempt is to try to conceal the truth, to try to make it look as though we can try to play around with the system. So that is an instinctive aspect that has come into play today. And we find that the effort of the system there is a systemic effort to ensure that the statements have truth. Because if the statements before the court do not have the truth stated in them, the court cannot discover the truth. That's a simple logic. So that aspect has been mentioned here. And interestingly, there is a clear preference to avoid professional pleaders in the process mentioned here. So the parties directly deal with the court in a way. So this, for example, Pashyato Bravato Bhumer Hanir Vimshati Varshiki Parena Bhujyamanaya Dhanasya Dasha Varshiki. This is an interesting shloka, 24th shloka of the Yajnavalkya Smriti of the Vyavahara Adhyaya, because this had become a great source of intrigue during the British period. So the British were trying to establish their law based on the Dharmasastra. So the British were trying to interpret the Indian laws in a manner that would suit them. So the effort was to take away land from the zamindars and hand it over to the ryots, so that the power of the zamindars could be reduced during the British period, especially at the time of Warren Hastings. So they had interpreted this particular shloka to say that the land, anybody with a 20-year-old possession of land would become the owner of the land. So that was an effort that was made. So therefore, there are political aspects to understanding how the interpretation of Dharmasastra can be given effect to, and there are multiple interpretations. So there are interpretations that protect the rights of the owners. There are interpretations that seek to give land to the possessors of land, etc. So there is a variety of interpretation, and the effect of all of that, effect of reading all of this, is to understand that we have an indigenous method of understanding how legal aspects can be understood, interpreted, and that is a system that we find sorely lacking today in our practice of law. Because for all aspects, we seek the inspiration from various Western sources or from other sources, etc. Whereas there is a great source of legal discussion and legal dialectic that we can seek to source from our own studies, from the traditions of the Nibandhas that exist in the Dharmasastra. So these are some of the aspects that we see, that the family as the unit of economy, because the family is the only unit that is producing further members of the society. That is, it is reproducing as well as making the economic basis of society. So that becomes a great portion of the great aspect of the discussion in the Dharmasastra is Daya Bhaga, how the family and the family law with regard to distribution of property can be given effect to. So therefore, we have the aspect of Dina Bandhu, property rights of women being taken care of, and the woman and the Dampati being the basis of society. So therefore, we find that Dharmasastram, its reading through an understanding of the Shastram, is something that we lawyers can give effect to, and members of the society also should find interest, find interest in looking into the Dharmasastram to understand where we came from and what is the soul of Bharat that we seek to find today. So we have been trying to conduct workshops, webinars, and study material has been created. And we believe that the efforts of the Sanskrit College, especially Sanskrit and beyond, digitizing these kind of dissemination of knowledge to a wider audience is something that is meaningful and should be given effect to. And this can be one of the directions that can be looked into for the purpose of giving effect to your objectives. Thank you.